Ever wonder how one brilliant mind, nearly 2 centuries ago, managed to predict so much about a nation's future? Its strengths, its hidden weaknesses. That's exactly what we're doing today. We're really digging into one of the most, well, eye-opening books on political thought ever written, Alexis de Tocqueville's Democracy in America. We basically got a stack of insights from excerpts of this profound text. It's almost like a time capsule. Our mission today is to unpack Tocqueville's groundbreaking observations from his 1831 visit to the United States. We'll explore his personal motivation for writing it, the fundamental factors he believes sustained American democracy, its surprising advantages and potential pitfalls, and how it dramatically reshaped American society and individuals. Think of this as your shortcut to truly understanding a classic without, feeling overwhelmed. Okay, let's unpack this. Why was a French aristocrat, of all people, so captivated by the American experiment in democracy? Turns out, his personal story is deeply intertwined with this grand intellectual journey. He was born in 1805 into a declining French aristocratic family. He famously described himself as coming into the world at the end of a long revolution that destroyed the world, but had not yet created anything stable. Pretty powerful stuff.
Yeah, and that long revolution was, of course, the tumultuous French Revolution. I mean, it saw his great-grandparents and grandparents executed. His parents just barely escaped. So this traumatic family history directly fueled his inquiry into American democracy. He felt the French Revolution, well, despite overthrowing the aristocracy, had been deeply disappointing. France just struggled with constant post-revolutionary chaos. He believed a new world, a democratic world, needed a completely new political theory, one based on the fundamental principles of democracy itself.
Right. And while many scholars before him had studied democracy, their focus was often on the past, ancient Greece and Rome. Tocqueville, though, he was forward-looking. He believed contemporary democratic principles needed to be derived from contemporary historical conditions. He desperately sought a modern democratic model, and in his time, America was undeniably the best example out there. So in 1831, at just 26 years old, he seized an opportunity to visit and personally observe American society and democracy for 9 months. Quite a trip for a young man.
Absolutely. And the result was democracy in America. It was an instant sensation, really, across Europe and America. Today, it remains a political science classic, widely considered the first book for anyone trying to truly understand the U.S.
It's clear his personal history profoundly shaped his thinking. But what specific central questions was he really hoping to answer with this monumental journey into America?
Well, what's fascinating here is how his personal trauma and the political instability of post-revolutionary France directly shaped his intellectual curiosity. He saw France struggling, really struggling, to reconcile freedom and equality, and he sought answers in the burgeoning American Republic. He wanted to understand why American democracy succeeded where France, in his eyes, had stumbled or at least struggled so much. His book ultimately explores and answers three key questions. First, why did democracy and liberty combine so well in the U.S., but not in France? France aimed for freedom and equality, but people often ended up with what he called equal servitude.
Equal servitude, wow.
Yeah. Second, what were the inherent advantages and disadvantages of American democracy? And could its flaws be truly mitigated or corrected? And finally, how did the very essence of democracy fundamentally influence American societal mores and politics? The day-to-day stuff.
Okay, so after his observations, Tocqueville identified three crucial factors for America maintaining democracy: its natural conditions, its legal institutions, and what he called its mores, which I gather meant the ingrained habits of mind, customs, shared beliefs.
Exactly, mores. And he saw these as progressively more important. Mores were the most important, then legal institutions, and then natural conditions. He famously stated, without mores, legal institutions cannot function.
So the spirit behind the law matters more than the law itself.
Precisely. And he had specific examples to illustrate this hierarchy. For natural conditions, he noted America's geographical distance from European monarchies meant no immediate military threat. That allowed republicanism to flourish. Also, America was a multi-centered society, unlike France, where Paris was, the undisputed hub. Tocqueville insightfully noted America had countless centers, which means no center, an early observation that still resonates about American decentralization.
Interesting. And then the legal institutions?
Yeah, he discussed the U.S. Constitution, federalism, the bicameral legislature, presidential elections, judicial review, all the big structures. He viewed these as great institutional designs, interdependent and vital for sustaining American democracy. Think of it as the scaffolding.
The scaffolding, okay. But it needs something inside it to hold up, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which brings us back to the mores.
Right back to mores. For Tocqueville, this was the most crucial factor. Not just laws, but the ingrained habits of mind, customs, shared belief that truly animate a society. It's like the unwritten operating system beneath a legal code. Without it, the fancy hardware of laws and institutions simply won't run.
That makes sense.
And he observed a striking difference between France and America regarding religion. In France, people often believed religion was the enemy of freedom, requiring the overthrow of the church. In America, freedom and religion seem perfectly combined. Tocqueville argued, flat out, without religion there is simply no American freedom. The very idea of humans being born free and equal, he believed, came from religion.
That's a strong statement.
It is. He also noted American education, unlike Europe's focus on private life, was specifically geared towards participating in public affairs, imbued with a Republican spirit.
So it trains citizens, not just private individuals?
Exactly, which raises that important question. If the laws are there, why do mores matter so much more? He offered the example of 19th century Mexico. They copied the U.S. Constitution almost verbatim, but it failed. Why?
Because they didn't have the American mores?
Precisely. It lacked America's underlying mores. This highlights his powerful belief that a nation's spirit, its habits of mind, is paramount.
Okay, let's shift gears slightly. Tocqueville's view of democracy itself. It was surprisingly complex, wasn't it? Not just rah-rah democracy.
Not at all. He saw it as a neutral force, really, capable of either fostering freedom or destroying it. This was a crucial contribution, especially since democracy was often, well, kind of a derogatory term before him.
How so?
Well, it generally meant direct democracy, which figures like Montesquieu and even the U.S. founding fathers viewed as inefficient, unstable, prone to the tyranny of ambitious individuals.
Right, they talked about building a republic.
Exactly. What we call democracy today, constrained by liberty and constitutionalism, is essentially representative democracy, which they called a republic back then.
Wow.
The U.S. founders famously sought to establish a republic, not a direct democracy. The idea was it filters public passion and allows for larger, more stable communities.
So Tocqueville is looking at this American republic, this representative democracy, and comparing it.
Yes, comparing it to the aristocratic systems he knew, and he outlined 5 distinct advantages he saw in the American model. First, democratic laws tend to serve the interests of the majority. Even if these laws appear mediocre, maybe not brilliant, they are generally more humane and gentle.
More humane than aristocratic laws.
That was his argument. He felt aristocratic laws, while maybe clever, primarily protected the wealth and power of a few. He pointed to British aristocrats who had foresight but consistently legislated against the poor. Democratic laws, flawed as they might be, aimed more broadly.
Okay, advantage 1. Laws for the many. What's second?
Second, a strong public spirit. He noticed that while equality can sometimes make individuals feel isolated, it also forces them to form associations to gain power. Americans, especially with their strong local self-governance, treated public affairs as their own business. He contrasted this with places where self-governance was absent there. People became indifferent, just looking to the central government for everything.
So participation breeds engagement. Makes sense.
Third, a vibrant, almost instinctual rights consciousness. This really struck him. Tocqueville found that even poor Americans fiercely defended their rights against infringement. This was totally unlike commoners in aristocratic societies who, frankly, had never really experienced having rights in the same way. It wasn't just theoretical, it was lived.
That feeling of this is my right was deeply ingrained.
Deeply. The very experience of having rights transforms citizens into vigilant guardians of liberty. That's a foundational difference.
Okay, 4th advantage.
Fourth, respect for law. He observed a profound respect for law in America. Americans, he said, showed deep reverence for their laws, even seemingly odd ones, viewing them as their own creation, like we made these rules.
How did you put it?
To Tocqueville, respecting laws was like respecting their parents. It imbued them with an irresistible authority. That sense of ownership is powerful.
Definitely. And the 5th advantage.
Fifth, an active citizenry. Americans were autonomous, responsible for themselves, constantly forming new ideas, new plans, actively engaging in public affairs. The whole society felt active and prosperous. Unlike the passive subjects in aristocratic states, democratic societies might not achieve the grand singular projects of aristocracies, but they possess this unmatched vitality and prosperity. Things were happening everywhere.
Okay, those are some compelling advantages. But as we said, Tocqueville wasn't just a cheerleader. He was remarkably clear-eyed about the shadows, the potential downsides.
Oh, absolutely. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, his analysis isn't a simple thumbs up. It's a complex assessment, highlighting that even positive developments have inherent risks, risks you need to understand and manage. He outlined four significant dangers of democracy. First, and this is maybe his most famous concept, the tyranny of the majority.
Tyranny of the majority. That sounds ominous.
It is. In a society where the majority rules not just in law and policy, but even shapes public opinion itself, he warned, tyranny is almost inevitable without effective safeguards.
But isn't majority rule the point of democracy?
Yeah.
How did he distinguish between legitimate rule and this tyranny?
Good question. He saw it less as physical oppression and more as a spiritual and intellectual one. Legitimate majority rule respects minority rights, allows for dissent, for difference. Tyranny of the majority, though, crushes not just political opposition, but also individual thought and variation. It creates this suffocating conformity where everyone feels pressured to think and act alike.
Okay, that's a chilling idea. What was the second danger?
Second, policy instability. Elected decision makers with short terms, constantly changing, lead to fluctuating policies, just constant change. While laws might be closer to the people, in theory, these rapid shifts can leave citizens feeling disoriented. It makes it hard to plan or invest for the long term. We still hear echoes of this critique today, right?
For sure. Short-term focus versus long-term stability.
Mhm.
Okay, third danger. This one you said was counterintuitive.
Yeah, this one's tricky. He observed that because officials in democracies were elected and therefore trusted by the people paradoxically granted them greater discretionary power.
More power, not less.
More discretionary power. The thinking being, well, we elected them, they represent us, so let them decide. But this trust could easily lead to abuse. It contrasts sharply with the modern view that democratic officials are somehow more constrained. The trust itself becomes a vulnerability.
Wow. Okay, that is counterintuitive. And the fourth danger.
Fourth, and this might also surprise you, he argued democratic societies tend to increase public spending.
Increase it. Why?
Well, unlike monarchies or aristocracies, where maybe the wealthy controlling the purse strings might be more frugal with state funds, in democracies, ordinary citizens are involved in spending decisions, and naturally, they often seek benefits for themselves or their communities, sometimes leading to, well, a redistribution of wealth through public expenditure. When everyone has a say, everyone wants a piece of the pie.
So these are pretty serious dangers.
Mm-hmm.
Tyranny of the majority, instability, arbitrary power, maybe overspending. Given all this, was Tocqueville ultimately a pessimist, or did he see ways America was perhaps managing these risks?
That's the crucial question, isn't it? Can democracy self-correct? And Tocqueville found that, yes, the U.S. did possess unique factors that acted as important correctives. He identified three main ones.
Okay, what were they?
First, local self-governance. This really helps temper majority tyranny. He noted that in the U.S., though the majority often showed the tastes and tempers of a tyrant, it did not yet possess the most complete means of tyranny. Why? Because power was so diffused locally, it wasn't all concentrated in one place.
Decentralization is a shield. Makes sense. What's the second corrective?
Second, something he called the spirit of the jurists. He met the legal profession, lawyers, judges, and their influence on government. He saw this as America's strongest barrier against democracy going astray.
The lawyers.
Really? He saw British and American lawyers as unique, sort of conservative by nature, rational, rule-bound, lovers of order and precedent. He doubted democracy could last long without the influence of this jurist spirit growing alongside popular power. Because, as he famously put it, almost all political questions sooner or later become legal questions. Their logic, their respect for precedent, acted as a crucial brake on purely emotional or impulsive popular will.
Interesting. So the legal mind provided a kind of intellectual ballast.
You could put it that way, yeah. And finally, the third corrective, the jury system.
The jury, like in court.
Yes, but he saw it as much more than just a judicial tool. Tocqueville viewed the jury as a profoundly political institution, embodying the Republican spirit. Jurors participate directly in public affairs, especially in civil cases, which, he noted, affect everyone's interests. He actually likened the jury system to a free school.
A free school?
Yeah, a free school. Always open, teaching citizens about governance, about their rights, about responsibilities, and cultivating their respect for the process of law. It's where ordinary people learn firsthand about justice and the rule of law by doing it.
That's a really powerful way to think about the jury. Okay, so we've seen the structures, the pros, the cons, the correctives. Let's move into how democracy, according to Tocqueville, fundamentally shaped Americans themselves, their thoughts, feelings, daily lives.
Right. This is where Volume 2 of his work really shines. He looks at the impact on individuals first. Intellectually, he observed a preference for abstract ideas.
Abstract ideas. Like what?
Well, in democratic eras where everyone feels sort of similar and equal, people tend to favor broad generalizations. Think human rights as a concept, rather than focusing only on the specific ancient rights of, say, one particular class or group. He did note, though, that American pragmatism kept this somewhat grounded. Americans liked practical results, too.
Okay, what else for individuals?
Religion again, he kept coming back to it. He stressed its vital role in American freedom and the Republican spirit. The separation of church and state in the U.S., paradoxically, allowed for this perfect blending of freedom and religion.
Unlike Europe.
Unlike Europe, yeah, where the fusion of church and state often bred resentment against religion itself. Americans, he argued, understood instinctively that without a religious spirit, there is no American freedom. However, he also worried. He warned that democracy's emphasis on individual reason, on science, could actually diminish traditional reverence, potentially leading towards pantheism or even atheism, creating a kind of spiritual void. A danger there, too.
And then there's that really critical insight about equality versus freedom.
Ah, yes, this is huge. Tocqueville found that people in democracies often prioritize equality over freedom. It's a subtle but profound danger.
Why would they do that?
Because once you have independence, the benefits of social equality are immediate, tangible. Everyone enjoys feeling equal. Even minor inequalities start to really bother people. But freedom demands personal responsibility, effort, vigilance. It has costs. Many shrink from that. People might even prefer, he warned, a perfectly equal society without freedom, what he called equal servitude. Especially if a society achieves equality before it really secures freedom. The love for equality becomes incredibly strong.
Because equality feels easier.
Exactly. Equality can feel like it just happens over time, it spreads naturally. Freedom, however, requires constant struggle. He famously said, freedom is one of the most astonishing things, bringing rich results, but the art of maintaining it is the most difficult and complex. It's not the default setting.
A chilling warning. What about individualism? That's another key Tocqueville idea.
Yes, but he was worried about a specific kind. An atomized or isolated individualism. A situation where democracy weakens traditional social bonds, family, community, class, and people, become sort of estranged from each other, retreating into their own little private worlds.
But isn't individualism sometimes seen as a good thing?
He distinguished this negative, atomized individualism from what we might call true individualism, which emphasizes free will, but also association and community values. He saw two things in America that helped prevent the worst kind of atomization.
Which were?
First, a proper understanding of self-interest. Americans, he thought, generally understood that pursuing their own interests didn't have to mean harming others or the public good. They called it self-interest, rightly understood. And second, that deep-rooted local self-governance we talked about. Citizens were constantly participating in public affairs, from schools to town meetings to voluntary groups. This fostered a tradition of widespread mores involving community action.
Which links back to another famous Tocqueville idea, the art of association.
Precisely. To counter that potential for atomized individualism, people need a constant desire and ability to associate, to unite, form alliances, self-organize. He was astonished by how developed this was in America. Political parties, businesses, charities, clubs, religious groups, associations for everything. He coined that famous phrase, "The art of association is the mother of all arts." His advice was basically, if you admire American civilization, study their art of association. It's the glue.
So people associating counters that tendency to drift apart. What about materialism? Did he see that as a danger?
He definitely saw it, and he saw it as a natural consequence of democracy. In democratic times, pretty much everyone has to support themselves. So the pursuit of material wealth becomes a dominant passion. He observed severe materialism in America. Everyone dreaming of wealth, constantly working, maybe leaving little time for, as he put it, great things, philosophy, art, deep reflection.
But did he see any counterweights to that either?
He did. Two main ones again. First, religion, which he felt restrained people, to some extent, from pursuing wealth unscrupulously. It provided a moral compass. And second, a unique American passion for freedom itself. He observed that when material wealth seemed to conflict directly with freedom, Americans often chose freedom, seeing it as the fundamental prerequisite for creating wealth in the first place. Freedom came first.
Okay, so those are the impacts on individuals. How did these tendencies play out on the broader societal level? What did American society look like as a result?
Right, what happens when these individual trends scale up? He identified several key characteristics of democratic society as a whole. First, perhaps obviously, more equal and milder mores. Identity equality is the defining feature, leading to ever milder mores. In aristocratic times, society was rigidly stratified, people in different classes lacked common interests, and customs, even punishments, were harsher. In democracies with more equal status, people empathize more easily with each other. There, but for the grace of God, go I, sort of thing. This leads to milder laws and customs. You see it in how people treat each other.
So greater empathy across society.
Yeah.
What else?
Simpler human relationships. The rigid hierarchies, the elaborate etiquette of aristocratic society, they tend to disappear. Human interactions become simpler, more natural, frank, and open, as he put it, less bowing and scraping.
He even thought Europeans seemed cold to strangers because of their state systems, not just temperament.
Yeah, it was the structure forcing distance. Democracy allowed for more direct connection. Third, changed family relations. Big one.
How so?
Aristocratic families had strict hierarchies. Think primogeniture. Children subject to parental authority, sometimes well into adulthood. In democracy, generations become more equal and independent much sooner. He noted that in America, children first become independent in thought, then in action, and embark on their own life paths as soon as adolescence ends. This fundamentally reshaped the American family, making it less hierarchical, more companionate, perhaps.
Okay, and the last societal impact. This sounds like the really concerning one again.
It is a powerful and maybe the most chilling tendency. Centralization of power and the risk of a new kind of tyranny.
Centralization. Even with all that local self-governance he admired.
Paradoxically, yes. He observed that in democratic societies, while individuals feel independent, they also feel relatively weak on their own compared to the whole of society. And society itself, the collective, grows stronger. So people tend to favor a single, supreme central government. They expect it to do what individuals or small groups cannot, especially in places where local self-governance is weak or declining. People come to love and rely on the central government like a benevolent guardian, seeing it as stable amidst constant change. He saw shades of this in the emerging modern state, maybe even precursors to the welfare state.
Why does equality lead to this?
Because the ideal of universal equality makes people favor uniform, standardized laws applied equally to everyone across the board. It seems fairest. Local variations, special privileges, they seem suspect. This creates a kind of fascination with centralized power, which can then pave the way for a new, historically unprecedented form of tyranny, what he called soft tyranny.
Soft tyranny, not like the old kings and emperors.
No, not brutal or overtly cruel, more subtle, more gentle, but also more pervasive. It meticulously infiltrates daily life, he wrote, regulating, guiding, managing, infantilizing the population. Tocqueville found this potentially more terrifying because people might not even perceive it as tyranny. It doesn't feel like oppression. It's like that frog in slowly warming water. You slide into servitude unconsciously, losing your freedom bit by bit without ever realizing it because it's comfortable.
That's a deeply unsettling image, especially when you think about our world today.
It really is.
So, given all these profound insights, the good, the bad, the deeply worrying, what was Tocqueville's ultimate message? What was he trying to tell France and maybe us?
Well, his core message was pragmatic, almost fatalistic in a way. He believed the global trend towards democracy and equality was basically irreversible. You couldn't stop it. So the goal shouldn't be to try and destroy democracy or block equality. That's futile. The goal must be to guide democracy, to educate it, to ensure it combines with freedom.
Don't fight it. Steer it.
Exactly. Steer it towards liberty. And how do you do that? By actively cultivating a love for freedom, by staying constantly vigilant against the dangers of majority rule and that soft tyranny, by recognizing the limits of equality, that it's not the only good, and crucially, by actively participating in public life, especially through that local self-governance and the art of association he admired so much.
He famously said, "Because I am not against democracy, I want to treat it seriously."
Precisely. He wasn't an enemy, he was a critical friend. And he concluded, quite starkly, democracy is irresistible, resistance is hopeless and unwise. That was his poignant advice back then, but wow, does it still echo.
What a journey through Tocqueville's remarkably prescient mind. Seriously, it's amazing how much he saw. We've seen how this keen observer, driven by France's own struggles, brilliantly dissected American democracy, from the critical role of mores, that spirit being maybe more important than laws, to the surprising benefits like an active citizenry and those equally surprising dangers like the tyranny of the majority and that insidious soft tyranny.
Hmm.
We've explored how democracy reshaped everything, didn't it? From individual thought and the tension between equality and freedom, right down to family dynamics.
He really did provide an incredible framework. And maybe the biggest takeaway is that freedom is neither automatic nor easy. It's an art, as he said. It requires constant cultivation, constant vigilance, especially in an age like ours, where the pull towards equality, towards comfort, maybe towards that soft tyranny, is so incredibly strong.
So as you reflect on this deep dive, here's something to think about. What specific actions might you take right now in your own community, however small they seem, to foster that art of association Tocqueville admired? Or how can you personally help nurture that love of freedom that he saw as so vital for true democratic flourishing? How can you contribute, in your own way, to making your community a vibrant, free school of self-governance?